on to the Christchurch City Council draft response on the draft outline of the Ōtākaro Avon River Corridor Regeneration Plan. Because what I'd like to do is move into public excluded so that we can come back at 1:30 and deal with the attachments for the report, so that when we can reconvene the meeting within a timely fashion in order to then move on. And if we could get an indication from people, I'd probably like to indicate to the media, for example, that we're likely to reconvene as a public meeting, probably around, would half an hour be enough for the PX components of that? There's a couple of other papers in PX, so we might as well just deal with the lot. So maybe about 2:30 reconvene for the final paper. Yep. All right. Mind you, if this is quick enough, we can get through both the both of these before lunch. That would be great. All right. Shall I hand over to staff just to give us a brief overview of the process that we're in, because I think some of the public commentary I've seen around this would indicate perhaps a misunderstanding around the process.
Do you want me to go? Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, this is a draft response from Council in relation to the draft outline which has been put together by Regenerate Christchurch. Now, Regenerate Christchurch is the only authority who can prepare an outline or regeneration plan for this area of land. So in terms of the outline itself, what it actually achieves, it's not the regeneration plan itself. What it must do is identify the opportunities for public engagement, set out, and really what it does is set out the process for developing a regeneration plan itself. So the substantive nature of the work is still yet to be done. Really this is the area that we're looking to develop a regeneration plan for, and these are the timeframes that we're looking to do it within, and this is the engagement process that we're looking to undertake with the public to get it done. So that's all it really does. It doesn't get into those substantive issues of what's right and what's wrong and what should be in and what shouldn't be in. Having said that, it is an important statutory document because the regeneration plan itself must be consistent with the outline. So it does have weight, it is important, but it's not the regeneration plan per se. It's not the main course, as it were. It's the entree. And where we are at the moment is that comments on the draft outline close on 21st of February, so we've certainly got a few days within which to make any changes and get it in to Regenerate Christchurch if you want to do that. And then if you look at page 101 of your agenda, that sets out the time frame within which Regenerate Christchurch will look to prepare a regeneration plan and the process that they will go through within which to do that.
Very good. So that's helpful, thank you. And a really good description. I think that entree main course really helps to clarify the process that we're in. So questions? Phil?
Thank you. I just want to make sure, at the beginning, overarching issues, it is stormwater infrastructure is included there as an issue. When we turn to opportunities, on the next page, I want to find it, roads are clearly referred to, and I just want to make sure that in fact we retain necessary wastewater infrastructure, say, that we already have, that in fact we don't lose sight of what we need to retain. And clearly potable water will be another part.
Okay, so we could add a paragraph following the paragraph on the roading network, which addresses the wastewater and potable water infrastructure that crosses or services adjacent areas.
Yeah. Thank you, Helen.
Dion, then Yanni.
So, I mean, there is a fear, the community obviously got to look at this on the agenda the other day, so there is a fear that the Act states that we are a statutory partner and that feedback from the community isn't part of that statutory requirement from the Regeneration Act. But Regeneration Christchurch, or Regenerate Christchurch, is asking for public feedback on this, which is absolutely fantastic. But there is a perception or a fear that those weightings of their opinions won't be the same as those statutory weightings from us, which is why I've got a whole lot of questions from some people in the community. So the main one that I saw that has come back to me was around the time frame being quite tight after 6.5 years of quite a little amount of community input, that they're going to create the draft regeneration plan within the next 6 months, or 6 months after the draft outline has been created. And then there's only 30 days for the community to have some feedback on that. And the other thing that feeds into that quite closely is around the information sharing. So there's a bit of a Regenerate Christchurch's a policy is around free, open information. However, we all know that, and this just comes down to trust, I think, a big part of this, and this is where we as a council should be giving a little bit more waiting on actually trying to show this trust. And so, because we all know what Sarah did with getting rid of the documents and everything like that. They had a policy and then they changed the policy. So we don't want to get into a situation where, the Regenerate Christchurch is saying, we'll give all this open information at the moment, and then maybe they withhold something. So I think it's just really, it needs to be very clear so that trust is built up within the communities. And I think it's just, and the other point here, and I think it would go into part 5 of our submission, is about the public. The public must absolutely be involved in the visioning process, and that it's not just Christchurch that's involved. It's actually something that could be wider for the impacts of this is actually wider for the whole South Island and maybe for New Zealand as well. So I mean, there's a couple of little points that we can do there. So how can we get some of those points? I was getting there, I've just got a lot to get through. I'd say, how can we get some of those points potentially put into what we're submitting, so that we can actually just give that assurance to our communities, as we are the statutory partner in this document for our communities, I suppose.
Do you want to address the time frame?
In terms of the time frame itself, it is 6 months, but there's always that balancing act between too fast and too slow, and you'll be aware of the time frame for the Act itself. But again, if I direct you to page 101, it's 6 months to prepare the draft, but then if you look at all the other 30 working days, that adds up to about 40 weeks. So by the time you get this plan signed off, you're looking at a year to a year and a half type process. So it's quite quick in the first tranche, I guess, in terms of getting the draft plan put out there. But while I can't speak for Regenerate Christchurch, I would imagine they would continue to be working on that right up until the time it's delivered. So it's the process as a whole needs to be considered, I think, because they will be consulting undoubtedly and engaging with the community the whole way through.
So each of those dates in page 101 is subsequential. So 6 months, and then 30 days, then another 30 days, then another 30 days.
Yeah, that's correct.
So that's about 40 weeks for the last part, and that's to get it up to the minister, who then needs to make the decision itself. So if you add the 40 weeks on to the 6 months, it's a reasonably chunky period of time in total.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that this is Regenerate Christchurch's process, and yes, the process is driven by the requirements of the Act, to a certain extent, and certain amount of time has to be left for certain things. But I think what the community are asking for, and I went back and read Evan Smith and Sylvia Smythe's article that was published in the press, and it is worth reading, because what it does is it captures the essence, I think, of what Dion was saying, which is that there has been a loss of trust, and a new organisation has the shadow of what has happened before cast over whatever process it has to work with within the legislation. And I guess that they're looking for us as a council to reflect that to Regenerate Christchurch, that in terms of building trust, the more that the community can be engaged in feedback loops, the stronger the sense that this will be a participatory process. And given that this is exactly where we want to be ourselves as a council in terms of our decision-making processes, then I don't see any harm in just strengthening the language around that, because there is no question, I think, in the minds of anyone around this table that it's got to be participatory. But there is a need for some speed, and I mean, any recovery document that you want to read that's ever been considered anywhere in the world always says that there is a need to balance speed with deliberation. So as long as you have the capacity to engage and embrace and put everything in the public arena as you're going through a process, then the stronger that ability to get speed will exist, because there won't be resistance. And I came up with a phrase which was take your time as quickly as you can, and that phrase was designed to sort of kind of express the view that if you don't consult, you will spend longer in the long run. So you've got to find the right engagement process. So as long as we use language that strengthens that desire in our submission, then I think that will meet that concern.
So if we add to perhaps that section 5 response, where we talk about the importance of that community participation and engagement, and perhaps use some of the words that Regenerate Christchurch have on their website, in fact, about co-creation, putting the community at the heart of what they do, and ask them to reflect that more strongly in their plan, rather than just refer to the principles on the website.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think making it a lot more explicit would be quite handy. The other one there, the other question I have is around the durability of the regeneration plan. It says within the draft that the draft outline that it will only go up to the expiry of the Regeneration Act.
But remember that the regeneration plan itself is what is required to change the underlying documents. The underlying documents don't get repealed on the...
I know the RMA and all that sort of stuff.
Our district plan.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
If our district plan is changed by the regeneration plan, then the district plan remains changed. It doesn't end in 5 years.
Yeah, but what I think what we're getting here is if there's any sort of plans about doing something or doing things within those time frame, or within sort of what Regenerate Christchurch does, because we don't know what people will come back with in terms of a regeneration plan for that area, that if it does need something in that Regeneration Act and that Regeneration Act ends, then it just ends up being like one of those master plans again.
Which is why we have to crack on. So, I mean, it's...
You know what I'm saying?
You know, it is swings and roundabouts. So if we need powers that are available under the Act to be exercised, yes, they need to be exercised within 5 years. But if you're concerned about the underlying changes to the district plan, they do not end with the legislation. So, you know, I mean, this is the conversation that we need to have, and maybe that's also useful for Regenerate Christchurch to be publicly expressing you know, the nature of the changes that can be made under the Act, or the powers that can be exercised, because they are time limited in one respect, but not in terms of any changes to the district plan.
And there was one more.
Well,
I think that will become clear in the plan itself.
Yes,
and I think that is probably a matter for the council when it's involved in the regeneration planning itself, rather than a comment on the what is the plan for the plan.
Yeah, I mean, they just make explicit. They make comment in it in their draft outline, which is, I think, what was important there. And the other thing that I think that has come back is around the biodiversity. There's no mention of that at all.
Yes, so in our submission we have been very clear about the importance of the river corridor as a river corridor. So that's the conveyance functions of the river, but also the ecosystem functions of the river, the riparian margins and the estuary. So that's all captured within our submission here, and that's matters of biodiversity, water quality, landscape, and recreational opportunities.
Yeah, I thought that was a very powerful part of our
submission.
submission.
I mean, it just doesn't explicitly say those kind of things. That's why it's the
first part of our submission. Yeah. Yanni?
Thank you. I just have two questions. two quick questions. One was, I was just concerned that if there were ideas that, like we've heard how long it's going to take, so if there were ideas of things that we wanted to do as a community or a city in the red zone, do we have to wait for the end of this process in this area, or is there other mechanisms that we can use to get progress? And I mean, obviously, I raised the example of the Bill Sutton House, which I think we wrote about 4 years ago as a council, trying to get progress on that, still waiting. It would be really good to know that there was an opportunity to do things quicker than waiting for this plan, which will take another year and a half, if there is a kind of immediate need for some of these things to happen.
Well, as staff, we think one of the important things that needs to be considered, and we've spoken to this in terms of our draft submission, is those transitional uses that may be established throughout the land subject to the regeneration plan, and we've used the example of a cycleway potentially along stock banks, and as you know, council's got broader plans for a city to see cycleway anyway. It might not be in the exact same location. I think that's the type of thing that certainly from what I understand from Regenerate Christchurch, they're keen to see happen. And yes, the plan process does take a little bit of time, but I don't think, my own personal view is that shouldn't be an absence of those transitional uses potentially being established in the interim. So those are the types of things that I think can occur on a transitional basis, but perhaps come permanent in the future. So that's something we've touched on in relation to the City to Sea cycleway, but it is something we could broaden if that's an issue you'd like us to bring out a little bit more.
Yeah,
we're just using an example.
I personally think it would be really good. I mean, you remember the idea for the Garden Heritage Park that had a dwelling on it. That dwelling's now being demolished, so we lost the opportunity to have a transitional cafe, garden space, a whole bunch of structures and things, whether it's trees or houses, or what's left is being taken away before the community can even get into this process. So what little we've got going forward that may be of community use straight away, I think would be really good to have a process to identify and put into action something so that we don't lose it all. So if you think that we can, incorporate...
We could use examples like what we've done, what council and other groups have done within the central city, which has worked really well before the permanent works have got in, and we had a discussion on that earlier.
Possibly, although you will recall for the community orchard in the central city that we have a resolution through council to try and get security of tenure, because these groups ask us for funding to put in to capitalise the projects, and we have no security of tenure, which means for the people that are trying to raise money, it's incredibly difficult because they're told, well, why would we invest in something if you're on a month-to-month contract? So I think there is a kind of room for improvement, and it would be good just to maybe highlight that if we could. Just the second question I had was around in the council document on page 97, and I just wanted to ensure it's the second bullet point from the top, which says it's to enable the Crown to efficiently and effectively manage, hold or dispose of Crown-owned land within the area by determining through a robust and streamlined process the best use of land, including options for future use that might offer a financial return for the Crown. And I was just concerned, my understanding is we can't, if we were concerned about that, we can't remove it because that's a statutory thing that is enshrined in legislation. But I was concerned that it may be hard for the community to advocate for community projects if that's hanging over one of the outcomes of this process.
I think the framework for the regeneration planning has multiple objectives, and the regeneration plan itself and the engagement with the community will have to navigate its way between those multiple objectives, and that one that you raise is certainly one that is there, and there will be some land within the residential red zone that is possibly capable of remediation and of some sort of development in the future that may provide a return to the Crown, and I suspect that is underlying that. That use is not necessarily in conflict, of course, with wider community values, and in some areas future residential development or commercial development could well contribute to the well-being of the broader area, and particularly as you move eastern towards some of those key activity centres, it may actually reinforce those key activity centres and add to the urban form of the city. So that'll be a question for the regeneration plan process itself.
So, I just thought a principle should be, I personally felt that people who have lost their property in the red zone actually do have some right in terms of if it's going to be sold off to future people to develop on, places where people lived and had their homes without any offer back to them would seem a little bit unfair.
I've already raised this, you know, with them and
So-
with the
so
minister
maybe we could just
on
do
other
some-
occasions, but
Yeah.
I don't think it's appropriate for the outline because there is
Well, just
there
in
is
that
no
section, maybe.
determination at this stage as to whether there will be development in those areas. But I think it would be not unreasonable to consider making property that was being redeveloped available. And it would have to be by ballot anyway, because if there was more interest than there were positions, but that would be buying at market value at the time, not at the rate that they were paid for their land.
Yeah, I just feel if people are forced off their land, then there should be some obligation to go back to those people
Yes,
before
but the
it's
law
sold.
didn't allow
No, I
that
understand
because
that.
they voluntarily sold it. We
Yep.
voluntarily sold it.
But we know the whole history of that. But,
Yes, I know
and
we know the
Human
history
Rights
of it, but
Commission.
in
So-
the contract we signed with the
Yep.
government, we signed an agreement that we wouldn't have a right of refusal if the land was subsequently developed.
That's right, it would be remediated before any of it was
Yeah.
offered
Yeah,
to
I just
anyone,
think
so it
that's
wouldn't be the
immoral.
same
Now
price.
12.51, so you're proving me wrong. You're proving yourselves wrong. I didn't think this would take a short period of time.
Sorry, there's one more thing that just going on from what Yanni said. I suppose we're very passionate about this, so it's very important.
I don't think
Is it
anyone
d-
else is. I'm not.
What's that?
Sorry. I'm being sarcastic. Carry on.
Thank you. There's no mention at all about people who still live there, and the comment in the actual draft outline talks about the plan will take over all of the red zone land, but there's actually no mention of those people who are in and around that and how they're going to be impacted and what's going to happen with them. So I think we actually do need to respect those people that live there, and when we're talking about doing
Yes,
these things.
Which is why their website is very respectful of them. And
Absolutely.
if that's not specifically identified in the outline, then I think it has to be.
Thank you.
With those amendments, people are generally happy to delegate authority to Carleen and myself to sign off the final wording. All right, so would someone like to move that? Jamie, seconded Phil. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you.